there is a institutionalized system in our government that violates the rule of law day after day, hour after hour. The violations occur against our Constitution. The violations occur against international treaties that we adhere to, the Geneva Convention, the UN Charter. The violations occur against federal statutes, even regulations. And when the rule of law is violated, it's important to ask, why did our founding fathers establish the rule of law, especially as it applied to foreign policy? Because they never wanted, again, one person in the White House to be able to plunge our country into war. That's why they made the supreme authority to declare war reside in the U.S. Congress. Madison and Jefferson thought that was one of their greatest accomplishments. It has now been de facto repealed. There's been no declaration of war since December 1941, but there have been plenty of wars. Now, why did they want that? Because the rule of law means that government decisions are subject not just to accountability, they're subject to being refereed, subject to public deliberation, subject to the kind of information that will allow reporters to ask government officials 2 questions repeatedly and get answers. Those 2 questions are, what is your evidence and where is your legal authority for what you are doing or proposing to do in the name of the American people? Do you know how many reporters never ask those 2 questions? When reporters don't ask those questions of people in the White House or in the Pentagon or in other agencies, State Department, they are no longer reporters. They are ditto heads for propaganda. And we're entitled to ask ourselves that when you have the language of plausibility, the language of deception, as Steve Kinzer pointed out, the kind of phrases that distort reality in order to evade or violate the rule of law, then you don't have the public trust of government supplying its people with information. It's pure propaganda rooted in prevarication, deception, cover-up, distortion, and deadly potential. I remember once, and we all remember this, you remember the $450 claw hammer that the Pentagon was paying contractors for, you know, the one you can buy for 10, 12 bucks in a hardware store? Well, I couldn't believe when the press reported that. How could anybody in the Pentagon pay $450 for a claw hammer? And I dug into it, and you know, it starts out with the prime defense contractor, then they subcontract, then they subcontract for pieces of it, and then on their way back, they add the markup. Well, here's what they called a $12 claw hammer that the taxpayer was supposed to pay $450 for. Quote, a unidirectional impact generator, end quote. This is the language of distortion, and it gets our country in a lot of trouble. For example, we have a selective use of the word terrorism. The terrorists are stateless terrorists, but far more terrorism is inflicted by governments on innocent civilians abroad. It isn't even close. Chaz Freeman, who was about to be nominated by President Obama to be Director of Intelligence until he was blocked by AIPAC in 2009, said the other day that the US government in recent years has killed over 2 million Muslims. Just remember that, 2 million Muslims. The vast majority are innocent men, women, and children. How many injuries were inflicted? Usually they're larger than the homicides. Now let that sink in for a moment. Who's the terrorist? Who's the prime terrorist here? Terrorism is defined as killing civilians for political purposes. Only in our country, it has a dual definition. It's defined as killing civilians for political purpose and also for profitable purposes, for the military-industrial complex. And as a result, with this propaganda sweeping through the country every day, we really think that the main terrorists are over there. But you have to ask yourself, who's in whose backyard? Who's been in whose backyard for over 100 years? Who's been in the backyard carving up the Middle East, carving up different tribal territories, imposing dictators or backing dictators or arming dictators? Who's in whose backyard? Who is the aggressor here? When it comes to the Israeli use of the word terrorism, which is almost every sentence by the government, the ratio in the last 10 years between the Palestinian resistance against the occupation and the Israeli military is over 40 to 1. There are 40 innocent Palestinians killed compared to 1 innocent Israeli civilian killed. And the injuries are even a more disparate ratio. Now, who's the aggressor here? Who's occupying who? Who's invading whose lands? Who's stealing whose lands? Who's stealing whose water? Who's colonizing whose land? And who's behind the Israeli military machine? The U.S. government. So you see, simple, when you apply the rule of law, you have a higher demand for evidence. You have a higher demand for truth. You have a higher demand for facts. You're insulated against the language of plausibility, the language of propaganda. We are now further from the rule of law in the conduct of foreign affairs than any time in our history, by far. The most extreme display of lawless presidential power under our Constitution was the attack on Libya and the toppling of the dictator. There was no declaration of war. There was no authorization of funds. There was no congressional appropriation of funds. It was taken out of the black budget in the Pentagon. Just think of the implications here and why the New York Times applied so much print in its expose of Killer Tuesday in the White House. When the president is so separated from legal accountability, whatever president, what happens is that the president can assign himself or herself, if Hawk Hillary becomes president, she scares the generals, assigns themselves the authority which has no basis in the rule of law to become the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, the executioner, and the cover-upper. Now just think of that. That de facto rejects the separation of powers between the judiciary, Congress, and the executive branch, and the balance of power that the framers were so insistent over 200 years ago in making the fabric of our Constitution. What happens also is a bizarre inversion of who gets media attention. Have you noticed that in the op-ed pages of the New York Times and Washington Post, the far greater frequency of opportunity afforded the warmongers? On one day, John Bolton, the warmonger who was despised by his boss, Colin Powell, in the State Department, when he retired, he got an op-ed in the New York Times and Washington Post. Paul Wolfowitz gets in. Elliot Abrams gets in. Others get in. But, you know, over the years, did you see Howard Zinn get in? Did you see Noam Chomsky get in? Did you see people who are advocating policies within the rule of law get in? You actually have op-eds in our major newspaper recommending government actions abroad that are blatantly illegal. They're unconstitutional. They violate the Geneva Conventions. And it's interesting, when Donald Trump said that he would waterboard torture illegal under the Geneva Conventions and kill the families of the terrorists, suspected terrorists, nobody said that is a violation of international law. The reporters didn't say, didn't you know that this is a violation of international law? Maybe once or twice he might have been asked that. We are a country that is rapidly removing ourselves from the rule of law. And that's the end of the United States of America. Our commercialized and corporate elections are now off limits to our democratic processes, to our legal processes. They're businesses unto themselves. There are people who've spoken out about this. They have said, why do we continue to pursue war policies that keep failing, that could be producing more illegal war, that produce more adversaries, that produce more skilled fighters against us? It started out after 9/11, a gang in northeast Afghanistan, numbering about 200. Look at it today. Look how successful our attacks here, there, everywhere have been. There are over 25 countries now. The spread of the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS and all the various subgroups and associated groups. When does our military and foreign policy get a flunking grade? Does it ever flunk in order to be changed? Do we learn from our mistakes? Empires do not learn from their mistakes. Empires decay and crumble because they don't learn from their mistakes and their violation of the rule of international law. Richard Clarke, do you remember him? He was the anti-terrorist advisor in the White House to the arch-terrorist President George W. Bush. And when he retired, he wrote a book. And in just one sentence, he indicated how we aid and abet, if not create, our own enemies. And then expand them and make them more skilled. And the more blowback, the more we do more of the same. It doesn't occur to us that we could be a humanitarian superpower that averts conflict and that does win the minds and hearts of people overseas. Here's what he said. He said, somewhere in the redoubts of mountainous Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden must be pleading to George W. Bush, please invade Iraq. Please invade Iraq. This is an establishment specialist in trying to think and do something about stateless terrorism. This is not someone who reads Karl Marx on his lunch break. In the tables down there, the final congressional testimony of Admiral Hyman Rickover, 1982. After 60 years of active duty in the U.S. Navy, been called the father of the nuclear submarine. Read this. See what his recollections were. See what his regrets were. See what he would have done different. See what he would like to see done. Our military budget now is over 50% of our operating budget of the entire federal government. There's no more Soviet Union. Communist China wants our jobs and industries. They're not going to send us missiles. We have an entrenched problem here. Less than 1% of the American people organized in congressional districts, working with retired high-level military, diplomatic, and national security retirees and connecting with one another and opening offices in every congressional district can turn this around. The media has no more excuses. The same media that tells you about all the money in politics will not cover the FCC's non-enforcement Section 317, which explicitly, with no loopholes, requires the disclosure of the secret donors to these PACs. The same media that talks about Pentagon waste and writes about Pentagon waste will not make an issue out of the unauditability of the Pentagon budget, violating federal law since 1992, unlike all other federal agencies who provide audits to the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, of Congress. The same newspaper that exposes high crimes and misdemeanors without calling them as such on the part of one administration after another, and repeats the reports of its reporters in editorials, will not draw the conclusion recommending impeachment, which is the only accountability between elections we have. And the Founding Fathers didn't think impeachment was that big a deal. Impeachment is an indictment in the House. It's not conviction. It's airing the charges. It does seem, in so many ways, we have a challenge before us. I have my idea, you have yours. My idea is establishment of a secretariat, as I described earlier. And I certainly hope that you'll find some ways where some affluent people who honor their country and their debt to posterity will be able to fund it. The people of conscious experience and patriotism who are now retired, who've served under both administrations, are willing and able to organize if they have an infrastructure, multiply themselves. You saw some of them today. You saw some of them yesterday. These are people of great courage. They understand reality. They understand the rule of law. They understand that the rule of law will only be enforced when the citizenry arouses itself. All nuclear arms treaties began with marches, demonstrations, protests by ordinary citizens. With the Soviet Union, didn't start inside the government. All peace movements start with people. And I'd like to just end on this note. And that's this. Sometimes brilliant diagnosis is its excessive satisfaction. Sometimes our realization that we know what's wrong and can recount it in great detail stalls us. It satisfies us from going to the next step. The next step is mobilizing to foresee and forestall. The next step is to recognize the greatest people in history are the peacemakers. The next step is to recognize that almost all wars, if waging peace started early enough, could have been prevented. Certainly look at World War I, starting in Sarajevo, leading directly to World War II with the humiliation of Germany and rendering it so vulnerable to the Nazi rise following the Treaty of Versailles. It starts with leaving here, or those who are watching on live stream, walking across to the neighbors, sitting in the living room, saying to themselves, do we count? Do we matter? Do we have an estimate of our significance that's worthy of our descendants? Can we carve out enough time from our busyness? Of course we can. We have the historical antecedents. We have the biographies to inspire us. All that's ready, all that needs to be done is for us to break up our routine a bit replace our despair a bit, lock arms together, and march forward, because the Founding Fathers gave us the greatest gift of all, the sovereignty of the people. The preamble to our Constitution is the unifying force of our population and citizenry. When it starts, we the people, and ends with we the people. It does not start we the corporation, or we the Congress, or we the political parties. Only self-respect leads to respect for others. That's where it starts, and that's where we are the multiplier. We know how many mass movements started with a handful of people, far fewer than are watching these days of breaking through power. We can stand on their shoulders, learn from their courage, and avoid their mistakes. I hope that you'll come tomorrow for the Breaking Through Power last day, which is breaking through Congress, the most powerful branch of government, that we have reposited our public authority under the Constitution, and one that has betrayed its public trust as a collective institution, exceptions permitted. We turn Congress around, we turn the war machine around. We turn Congress around, we turn the media around, because the actual media covers Congress, for good or ill. And we turn Congress around, and we restore the sovereignty of the people. Thank you very much.
I want to remind you that war is a racket. That's right, war is a racket. And when we clap, mostly because we understand that, and it's good for us to remember that. 1935, General Smedley Butler told us that, and unfortunately it hasn't changed much, if at all, since then. And some of the corporations at that time are different corporations that are taking us to war today. So we have to break that. That's one of the reasons when we're here today. Now, the two people that I'm getting ready to introduce are two people that I know, and I'm proud to be up here to introduce them. And it's always good when you can introduce people you actually know. One of them I met recently within the past 3 years, Matthew Ho. He spoke at our convention, and Raed Jarrar I've known for quite some time. So Matthew Ho is a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy and is the former director of the Afghan Study Group, a network of foreign public policy experts and professionals advocating for change in U.S. strategy in Afghanistan. He is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. I'm also happy to say he's a member of Veterans for Peace and serves on our advisory board. A former State Department official, he resigned in protest from his post in Afghanistan over U.S. strategic policy and goals in Afghanistan in September 2009. Ho served 2 tours in Iraq, 2004 through 2005, and as a company commander in 2006 and 2007 in the Marine Corps. And being a company commander is not easy to be a person serving in combat or in the military at all. Being a company commander is especially difficult. When not deployed, he worked on Afghanistan and Iraq policy and operation issues at the Pentagon and State Department. His writings have appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Defense News, The Guardian, The Huffington Post, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post, and many, many other places. Raed Jarrar serves as American Friends Service Committee Government Relations Manager at the Office of Public Policy and Advocacy in Washington, D.C. Since his immigration to the U.S. in 2005, he has worked on political and cultural issues pertaining to U.S. engagement in the Arab and Muslim worlds. He is widely recognized as an expert on political, social, and economic development in the Middle East. He has testified in numerous congressional hearings and briefings, and he is also a frequent guest on national and international media outlets in both Arabic and English. Born in Baghdad to an Iraqi mother and Palestinian father, Raed grew up in Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Iraq. So obviously he has a lot of knowledge that we need to hear, and a lot of experience with U.S. empire. He received his bachelor's degree in architecture from the University of Baghdad and his master's degree in architecture with a specialty in post-war reconstruction in Iraq from the University of Jordan. Mr. Jarrar has appeared in numerous media outlets, including MSNBC, et cetera, just many. But one thing that I think is more important than that, Veterans for Peace has a Veterans Challenge Islamophobia campaign, and Raed was a victim of Islamophobia. You should look this up, Google it, when he tried to ride on JetBlue with a shirt that I wear many times, "We will not be silent," in English and Arabic, and I'm sure some of you have that shirt. He was forced to cover it up. The ACLU helped him, and they won a case, and JetBlue had to settle. So now I bring to you Matthew Ho and Raed Jarrar.
We have the opportunity to head down to the Lincoln Memorial. Right down there, Veterans for Peace, a fellowship of folks who have suffered, whether directly or indirectly, by war, whether they be veterans, whether they be survivors of war, whether they be the children of war. And so, as I said, if you have the opportunity to visit that, please do. It's a beautiful experience, and I'm really proud of Veterans for Peace for doing such things as that. As you heard in that lengthy kind of bio, I've certainly seen enough of war. I've done enough of it. I've been part of the horrors of it. I've seen them. I've committed them. But one of the things I wanted to focus on here, and certainly if you're interested in the blood and the guts, you can go on YouTube and look it up. It's all there. You'll never see it on our media, but certainly for the folks who are living in it this day, it's available to be seen by outsiders on forums such as YouTube. But what I want to talk about the lies of war and its unending nature, because those are the things to me that really establish the horror of war. These wars today are no different than the wars of any other era. And no matter how smart we say our power is now, no matter how evil our enemies are, or no matter how righteous we say our cause is, that's something that's always been said. That's always been a trope. That's always been used by those in power to justify the slaughter of war and the horror of war. It's these beliefs in this country that allow war. It's these excuses, these rationales, and then there's a greed and a cowardice that backs it all up, that allows it to keep going, that allows war to never end. The excuses, the rationales are that we're the good side, that we harbor no ill will, we're not in war to profit, whether that be through geography or politics or financial gain. And that ours is a foreign policy based on altruism, based on morality, that we're seeking liberty and democracy as our goals abroad, and that our military force is always a reluctant use of force. And I think back very especially to when I was in college in 1995, Henry Kissinger's book, Diplomacy, came out. And it was a big deal for guys like me, for young people like me who believe that kind of garbage. It was. I rember it was a big deal. And I went to a pretty good school with a big foreign policy, international relations program, and this was a big deal. And Kissinger's argument in Diplomacy, that we believe, that we ate up, was that America is different, America is exceptional, America is unique because we have a foreign policy that's based upon altruism, that no one else in the history of the world has done this, and we are a moralistic country. We go abroad to do good things. And unfortunately at Tufts really didn't talk too much about the millions of people who are killed by Kissinger's bombs throughout the world. And Medea Benjamin's here someplace. There she is. And I just want to thank Medea for trying to arrest that man, because he is a war criminal. I wish 20-some-odd years ago I was reading stuff by Medea Benjamin rather than reading stuff by Henry Kissinger. May have helped with my PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and some other things I have. But the reality of war I best found is expressed by Curtis LeMay. General Curtis LeMay was, he was in charge of the bombings of Japan in World War II. And he'd be the man that Stanley Kubrick, in his, excellent movie, Dr. Strangelove, would pattern George C. Scott's character on. And LeMay said, after the war, he said, if we'd have lost this war, we'd all be prosecuted as war criminals. And, you know, today President Obama arrived in Japan. On Friday, he'll visit Hiroshima. He'll be the first president to do so. Right-wing media is having a heart attack. I mean, if you watch it, they're going berserk over it. And he's not going to apologize or anything. He's just visiting. And this myth, though, this myth that the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were necessary, is one of the greatest lies in American history.
You're right.
And it's the same lies we tell now about these wars, that they're necessary, that the people we're fighting are so evil that we have no choice but to destroy them, to destroy everything around them, and all those who are ancillary to it. Well, that's too bad, but this is what you have to do to confront evil. War is hell is what you hear from these commentators on TV all the time. Nothing makes me want to get my M4 back more than hearing something like that. Because those men and women are usually people who've never experienced it, never seen it. But you know, the reality of the atomic bombings was original. We had firebombed 67 Japanese cities by that point. We had killed upwards of 1 million Japanese in their sleep at night. Their whole families by firebombing by the time we destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the list of admirals and generals from the war who say that those bombings, those atomic bombings, were not necessary is as long as my arm, including 6 of the 7 5-star generals and admirals of the time. Eisenhower, MacArthur, Leahy. It wasn't necessary. That was a political move, that the Japanese had already been defeated, that they were going to surrender because the Russians were coming into the war. But it's a lie that has served this country so well, and here we are, how many generations afterwards, and most Americans believe it was necessary because it would save the lives of countless Americans and also countless Japanese. So, my God, how moral are we, right? We atom bomb people to be moral by that argument. And it's the same lies you hear over and over again that are resonant in today's wars. And President Obama just came from visiting Vietnam, a country we destroyed, in order to keep it from going communist because they were bad, they were evil, they were dangerous. We killed what? Maybe about 4 million Vietnamese? We dropped more bombs on the Vietnamese and the Cambodians and Laotians than all sides did in World War II by a factor of 7 or 8. Can you imagine that? And the unending nature of it is this. Those bombs are still killing. Every year, 1,000 Vietnamese die from our bombs that were dropped 40 to 50 years ago. 1,000. And so what does our Nobel Peace Prize winning president do? Sells them more weapons. Or that's the big announcement, right? Visiting Vietnam, we're going to sell the Vietnamese weapons. That's what we're going to do. And just as in Hiroshima, he's going to visit Hiroshima on Friday, he'll fly back, and he'll oversee a $1 trillion expansion of our nuclear weapons. So it's just the same things over and over again. A few years ago, we had to go to war in Syria because of the chemical weapons. Bless you. But it's not often spoken about in this country that we engaged in the largest chemical weapons campaign of all time. We dropped 20 million gallons of poisonous herbicide on the Vietnamese. We infected 5 million Vietnamese. 1 million Vietnamese are disabled in some way from our rainbow herbicide program, the agents orange, white, blue, etc. Hundreds of thousands of those are kids, and they're still being born today. You want to see some horrible things, some monstrous things, some things that will turn your stomach and make you cry? Google that. Google Vietnamese children, Agent Orange. And they are still being born today. How many were born today? Maybe a couple dozen? With some type of deformity, some type of cancer, some type of thing that is going to kill their parents, break their parents in half because of something we did decades ago. And this is occurring now. This doesn't end. Barbara Kopel's here somewhere as well. What a fantastic piece in the Washington Spectator. She's over there. A couple of months ago on the depleted uranium and other things that we did in Iraq that is killing Iraqi children today. Even if peace was to break out right now in Iraq and the violence was to stop, the Iraqis would never see the end of it, because their children will die for generations because of the war that we conducted in their country. And we did this because what? They were evil, and they were dangerous. We had to do it. And that's the horror of war to me. Because we're no different than any of our enemies. We're as bad or worse. And we use lies, and we use rhetoric, and we tell ourselves, and we teach our children things that just aren't true, that we're exceptional, that we're unique, that we're moralist. That killing in war doesn't really matter. That because we're trying to do it for a bigger purpose. And that those of us who speak like this don't understand the big picture. Which, in my case, is total BS because I've been through it all. And then folks will say, well, you don't understand the really big picture. And I say, no, I actually was the White House liaison officer for Secretary of Navy from 2002 2004. I mean, I saw how this went down from a very senior position. You know, and today, there's a fantastic, I shouldn't say fantastic, it's a terrible way to describe it, but Physicians for Social Responsibility last year put out a report, a very well done, very well respected, very sound report, that 1 million people have died in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan because of our wars since 2001. 1 million. How many millions are wounded? How many millions of families are devastated? That's untold. That's unknown. And so, as you go through this day, you're going to hear a lot of really, really terrific people. And you're going to wonder, why isn't more of this? Why is one of the people in this room the ones hearing this? And this gets to Ralph's larger point that we really need to organize. We really need to fight this. We really need to form some type of secretariat that can put forth this information, that can make sure people realize that the wars of today are no different than the wars of the past. That the wars that Smedley Butler and David Hackworth, two of the most decorated men in American military history, turned their backs on and decried, are the same things that are occurring now. And I'm going to go back to a Curtis LeMay quote as I wrap up here. Because LeMay said one time, and this I think in terms of his saying what I said before about the reality of war being that it depends on whether we win or not, whether we're war criminals or not. But what he said one time about why are we like this, what pushes us? Why do we have this policy? Why do we have this empire? And LeMay one time was talking to a subordinate. And he said to the subordinate, he said, "Oh, son, you got it all wrong. The Russians aren't the enemy. They're the adversary. The Navy is the enemy." And that's what we're up against here. We're up against a lot of money. We're up against a lot of careerism. Okay? And we're up against a lot of ideology that masquerades slaughter and massacre as a fairy tale. So I appreciate being here. I appreciate all of you being here.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you for Ralph and the conference organizers for inviting me. As Michael mentioned, I work with the American Friends Service Committee. It's a Quaker organization that is 99 years old. And we don't like war. Quakers don't like war. It's an anti-war organization that has opposed war for almost 100 years now. I was born in Iraq. I am half Palestinian and half Iraqi. And I lived around the region. So I have seen war the same way that Matt was describing war. I have seen it from the receiving end. One of my childhood memories was that after 1991, my father took me to a shelter in our neighborhood. It's called Al-Amiriya shelter. And that shelter was bombed on February 13th of 1991 by the US. 2 US stealth bombers bombed this civilian shelter with 2 laser-guided bombs and killed 400 Iraqi civilians who were hiding inside it, trying to find a safe spot in their city. And I remember that being one of these formative moments in my childhood, walking to a shelter that still smelled like war, that was still destroyed just a few months after it was bombed. And I always think of that as one of these experiences of defining what war is. It's very hard to explain what war is to someone who did not live through war. Because it's not really just about a bomb, it's also about the feeling, it's about the smell, it's about the fear, it's about the proximity to death. It's the way that you feel about it, you know? And it's very hard to explain to someone else. Like another example that I tell my friends now in the US to describe shock and awe. I was in Iraq in 2003 during the US invasion, and my family and I were hiding in a safe room in the basement of our house. And it was terrifying. The house was shaking, our windows were, a few of the windows, cracked and were broken because of bombing. And one of my memories is that my mother, who is a civil engineer, she spent her entire life building houses. She knows exactly how to calculate the load on the ceiling. But she was so scared that she put the sheets on her head. She was hiding under the sheets and hoping that would give her more comfort or more safety. And it's just like, feel that 1 second of horror of you being with your family in a basement room and not being sure that you're going to live for another minute or hour or day in the middle of these explosions that are happening. So I think from a US perspective, unless some Americans have served in the military or traveled to places where war happened, or like they experienced it firsthand, war is portrayed as this sanitized operation. We have smart bombs, we have laser-guided bombs, we have drones that can kill the bad guys. It's a civilian-friendly war. And that was something that I heard when I was in Iraq before 2003. And I kind of believed it for a while until I saw what happened in 2003. My own neighborhood was bombed. I saw civilians being killed in the streets. And the myth of a smart war or a smart bomb can't stand when you're actually there seeing it. Of course, we can't forget that some of these smart bombs were used to kill civilians in Almeria and other places. So the goal was to kill civilians. But even when the goal is not to kill civilians, there are always humans who will get destroyed and injured because of these attacks. Cluster bombs that the US used in Iraq, the US brags about our cluster bombs being the best in the world. That 99% of the ammunition detonates. I have seen what the 1% left causes. I have seen children who lost their legs because of an undetonated cluster bomb. So I'm saying, like, when we hear the sound bites in the media to describe the war, it's very different than actually being there. But what's even more terrifying than the bombardment itself is what happens after. And that is also something that I have unfortunately experienced. And that is the deterioration of security, the collapse of safety and security in communities. Right after the US invasion of 2003, the security in Baghdad started deteriorating, and I remember like smaller incidents of some of my friends and family getting attacked or injured. And one day, my own brother didn't come back home. He was kidnapped by the Iraqi government that was funded and trained by the US. He was kidnapped and disappeared for weeks. We couldn't find him. And it's yet another layer of what war causes. The horror of war is not just a bomb that falls in your neighborhood. The horrors of war is your brother not coming back home one day. It is the feeling of loss, of feeling terrified to go outside and just live. The fact that you don't feel safe in your own street. These feelings that it's very hard to even imagine if you have not gone through them firsthand. So now we're going through another attack in Fallujah this week. And Matt and I were talking about this a couple of days ago, about how Fallujah is one of these recurrent themes. There is always a reason to attack Fallujah. In 2004, the US invaded Fallujah and destroyed it. There are 3 or 4 other attacks that happened against the city. And this time, the attack is happening to liberate the city from a new evil monster called ISIS. And if you listen to the news, the US narrative makes it feel like this is a legitimate operation, that our friends and allies are attacking a bad guy in Fallujah to get them out. I don't think many Iraqis believe this narrative anymore, because Iraqis have lived under wars and bombardment for the last 25 years. The first US bomb fell on Iraq in 1991, January of 1991. And now we're in mid-2016. It has been 25 years and 4 months of continuous bombardment of Iraq. And the US policies have not really shifted, whether it's under the first Bush administration, the Clinton administration, the second Bush administration, or unfortunately now under the Obama administration. We have seen almost the same policy that is based on dividing Iraq and bombing it, happening over and over and over again. Not only that, actually, under the Obama administration, there is an expanded program to fund and train proxy groups to do the dirty work, to do the killing, to do the war crimes in Iraq and the rest of the region. One of the projects that AFSC has been working on is increasing accountability for US role in the region, the indirect role in the region. Of course, we're against wars and invasions, but we're also against giving weapons to Israel that Israel can use to kill people. We are also against selling weapons to dictatorships in the region and oppressive regimes like Saudi Arabia that has been using it to commit war crimes as well. So the US wars not only continue in the region, they have actually expanded and became more destructive by giving weapons and training groups that are completely out of control. Read the news of what's going on in Fallujah this week. Shiite militias affiliated with the government, who are funded and trained by the Iraqi government and indirectly by the US government, they are committing unbelievable war crimes, crimes against humanity. Some of their threats sound genocidal. One of the main militias announced that Fallujah is cancer that has to be removed. I mean, imagine the rhetoric that is being used. And we're funding them by our tax dollars. We're giving them money, we're giving them weapons, and we're giving them political cover to conduct these operations. So Iraqis are not really, they won't really fall for an argument that we can fix Iraq by bombing it. Because Iraq has been bombed for the last 25 years. And I don't think many Iraqis would argue that Iraq does not have extremism or violence, but many Iraqis will say that we can't bomb Iraq into modernity. We can't make Iraq more moderate by bombing it. We can't bomb Iraq into stability, you know? And these are the narratives that we are hearing from the US. So I'm very grateful that this gathering is happening at this time, because I feel that the last 8 years have been hard for us to organize. You know, before the 2008 elections, we had more of a vibrant community that opposed wars. Now, our community is taking a break. It has been taking a break, more or less. And not only taking a break, there is also a concerning tendency to support some wars and oppose others. And I have gotten in a few back and forth arguments with old friends of mine who usually oppose wars, but now they think maybe it's okay to support one war that would save a baby. You know, if we have babies in Iraq who will be attacked by ISIS, maybe we can support that war. Maybe we should support one war that would liberate a woman, an oppressed Iraqi woman that will be imprisoned by ISIS. Or maybe we'll support a war that would defend LGBT communities who are under attack. So I think this humanitarian intervention, you know, tendency that we have among our communities is something that we have to look into deeper and think really whether we can fix the world with more bombs. I don't think we can, and I hope everyone in this audience and online would also think that we can't fix Iraq or the rest of the region by throwing more bombs. I always like to be on panels with US vets who experienced the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, and who are speaking out against it now. Because there is this bonding experience between us, because we went through a situation that might seem at face value that Iraqis and US troops are the enemies, but at the same time, if you think about it one more step, just take one step away and think about it, an Iraqi who is outside a Humvee, you know, being shot at, and an American kid inside that Humvee who is killing civilians, have both been put there by someone else who has created this war and supported it. They are, in a way, they're both victims of this larger machine.
And our roles were not exactly similar, because I'm a perpetrator, I was an occupier. And I always think about what you just said, about the similarity. When I had command of Marines in Anbar province, I used to think, you know, if my Marines were young Sunni men, a third would be dead, a third would be in Abu Ghraib, and a third would be fighting us right now. And I remember one time very clearly, one of the things that haunts me is one of my kids, we got into gunfights all the time, and one of my kids, RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, bounced off his boot. Fortunately, didn't explode. But what traumatized him that day was that to get cover, they busted into a home. And the terror that they presented, the terror that they induced on the people in that home is something that still shakes me this day. And that's what shakes me, is the terror I induced, the horror I put into people. When you point your rifle at a lady because she's just walking down the street, it changes something in you. But one of the things, and it's something you'll never get back, and I'll never get back. But one of the things I wanted to ask was, you know, not just Iraqi, but you're also Palestinian. Why would you become an American?
And that is it's a good question, and we talked about it a little bit a few days ago. I think that question also encompasses another contradiction in my feelings that I had when I first came to the US. Because in Iraq, I didn't have friends who were American soldiers. I had interactions with US soldiers and tried to see the humanity in them, but I still had that invisible line between me and them. Like I never went out to have beers with the US soldiers in Iraq. When I came to the US, it was a contradiction in terms, because in a way, I was running away from the United States and its invasion and crimes in Iraq, and I was taking refuge in the United States. And there was a contradiction, definitely, in my feelings about coming to the US. Although, I think the majority of people around the world, for some reason, they still give Americans the benefit of the doubt. And there is some understanding that the US foreign policy does not necessarily represent the US public. And I had that feeling. As a US citizen now, I think they're being too generous to us. I mean, as for someone to exonerate me from being responsible of Saddam Hussein's crimes in Kuwait makes more sense than someone exonerating me from being responsible of our government's crimes. Because we pay taxes, we vote for this government, and we actively participate in many of the actions. But anyway, people give us some benefit of the doubt for some reason. But yeah, I mean, I had those contradictions, and I remember we had this project with the American Friends Service Committee, had a project called Eyes Wide Open. And we had military shoes representing US soldiers who were killed in Iraq, and we had civilian shoes representing Iraqi civilians. We had them in a park in Chicago. People were coming in and looking at them, they're reading the name tags and trying to get a visual of the casualties, trying to humanize both sides. And then I remember seeing this one woman who was weeping. She was crawling on her knees between the US military groups and weeping and reading the names, searching for a name of a loved one, I assume. It was a very heart-wrenching, very painful scene to see. It's a very painful scene to witness, of her crying and searching for this loss. And it reminded me of my father, because my father described the scene of him searching for my brother when my brother disappeared. And my dad had to go through morgues in Baghdad and go through dead bodies, crawl on his knees between dead bodies, searching for my brother. And it was that moment that I felt like we are both going through exactly the same. It was this one moment that really had an impact on me personally, to make me look one step farther than the helmet and gun and uniform, and see the human who was sent there, the human who was promised adventure and a student loan and a job after they come, and they end up getting killed in Iraq. And the pain of his mom, which is exactly the pain of my mom when my brother disappeared. It made me feel like there is no invisible line between me and the vet who suffered there, because we were really both the victims of the same issue.